Hello and welcome. My name is Alex Romero from Golasso Learning Solutions. On this week's Genuine Learning blog, we are going to be looking at the GAO, the Government Accountability Office's standards for internal control in the federal government, also known as and more commonly known as the Green Book. So we did just see a new version of the Green Book that was issued in May of 2025. And prior to this, we hadn't seen a new version since 2014. So the last time a version was released was in September of 2014. Our 2025 revision is going to have some changes from our 2014 version, and it also is going to supersede that version. Now, the Green Book is going to be issued by the United States Government Accountability Office, the GAO, and it's going to be under the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act of 1982. And this is requiring that the Comptroller General of the United States is to issue internal control standards for the federal government. So you might be asking yourself, okay, that's great, but what does that mean? What is the Green Book? So before we go and we look at some of those changes in this new revision, let's identify what the Green Book is. So this is going to be a book that talks about what those effective internal control systems and those standards for that for the federal government and those federal agencies. So this is providing a general framework that walks through how to design, implement, and then also monitor an effective internal control system. And it can be adopted by state and local governments and quasi-governmental entities. We also can see it in nonprofit organizations. And at the bottom of our slide here, we see a graphic that comes out of the Green Book, and it's showing how we are going to be looking at achieving our objectives through internal controls. So first identifying what your objective is, then creating the controls, putting them into place so that you actually are able to achieve your objectives. Our Green Book has different components and principles. You can see that the cube here that has the components is going to be that COSO cube. So we do have some similarities there. So if you know about COSO, you'll feel comfortable with this area. We have our 5 components that are looking at the control environment, our risk assessment, our control activities, information and communication, and monitoring. Within those 5 different components, we have 17 principles. And so you can see that on the graphic here, how those 17 principles are broken out amongst the 5 components. And so there wasn't anything that changed significantly in this area. We still had the 5 components and the 17 principles. We just saw some changes within those principles, and that some of the attributes were either added or expanded on. And when you go to the Green Book, you will see that the main part of the Green Book is going to be walking through the different components and then all the principles underneath that. So what are our key changes in this revision? Well, the GAO updated the Green Book in 2025 to provide requirements, guidance, and resources to help managers better address their risk assessment areas and looking at them as they're related to fraud, improper payments, information, security, also the implementation of new or substantially changed programs. And this is going to include those emergency assistance programs, which we saw kind of a lot of those most recently. And that was because of events like the pandemic, but also our cyber attacks. So this has really highlighted the challenges that management is facing when they're addressing the risks that are related to these different types of areas. So more specifically, we have our improper payments and information security risks. There were changes in that area. We have some documentation of risk assessment changes. Also, that documentation that's looking at if we do have a significant change in our entire system of internal controls. And then we also have 2 new appendices. And so appendix number 2 is providing examples of that preventative and detective control activities while our Appendix 3 is providing resources that management may leverage when they're looking at designing, implementing, and operating that effective internal control system. So with the 2025 revision, there is more emphasis on really focusing on the preventative control activities and telling management that they're responsible for this internal control environment at all levels of the organization. It's not focused on one area once everything comes into the finance department. This is talking about that we need to be thinking about all that cradle to grave and having management really oversee and have an understanding and a responsibility over that. We also see some clarifying intent on the standards. And as I pointed out with the components, we do see that continuing harmonizing with our COSO framework as well. So for improper payments and information security, we need to consider those risks that are related to each of these areas when we are identifying, analyzing, and responding to the risk. And there are whole sections in the Green Book that are going to be talking about the different types of improper payments and the improper payment risk factors. And then also the same for our information security risks and those information security risk factors. And I will highlight on this slide that you see in the parentheses where we talk about paragraph 8.01 through 8.05. What that's referring to are the specific paragraphs within the Green Book that you can find this information. And so when you go to those areas, you are going to see for improper payments, we're talking about having payments that might have been over or under, maybe something that doesn't have the proper documentation or a lack of approval. When we're thinking about our information security, is there unauthorized access? Is there installation of malicious software, automated attacks, all those different kinds of things. Then we move into our new documentation requirements. And so the first thing we're looking at is having further documentation about those risk assessments when we are doing our identification, our analysis, and our response to risks. And then also the second piece of this is when we have those changes that are going to be significant to our internal control system and make it so that we have to do something different there. We need to have a documented process that when we see something change like this, we can pull that process out and be able to identify the steps that we need to take so that we can put the control system back in place around these changes so that we have that effective internal control system. So we need to be able to do this quickly, but really be effective in it. And that's why we want to make sure that we have something that's already documented as a process. We have the broadening of our fraud types here, thinking about both our financial and our non-financial frauds. And then in paragraph 8.06, we actually see some of those types of illegal activities that would be considered fraud. So looking at corruption, bribery, extortion, and cyber crimes. And you've heard me say information security, cyber attacks, cyber crimes. So this is one of the things that I saw a lot of emphasis on in this new Green Book, is that we're really bringing it up to talk a lot about what can happen in the cyber world. Our preventative controls, we're in this area really iterating that management needs to design an appropriate mix of both our preventative control activities and our detective control activities. And this is going to be able to mitigate risk to that acceptable level. And again, you can see where you can find more information about this within the Green Book itself. So our effective date for this is going to be effective beginning with fiscal year 2026, which is meaning fiscal year beginning October 1st, 2025. So the federal government, their fiscal year end is 9/30 of each year. So your new 2026 fiscal year for the federal government begins on that October 1st, 2025. And this also is going to be covering the year that is for the Federal Managers Financial Integrity Act report of 1982. So that first year's report with the 2026 information, fiscal year 2026 is also going to have this. And you do have early implementation is permitted. Now, I wanted to show you this because I think it's interesting to point this out, how creative we are with our titles and what we refer to these different books as. So our green book is named as such because it is a green covered book on the standards for internal controls in the federal government. I also have listed the PDF underneath that shows where you can find the 2025 version of the green book, but we'll also have that information in the comments for you. So thank you so much for joining me this week on the Genuine Learning blog when we looked at the 2025 revision of the Green Book. Thank you.